Okay, so this here will be a little bit more of a different video. It will be us sitting down and just going through how to set up and animate this vehicle, how to dial in the physics, and to learn about a little new feature that's nice for doing that. So first of all, when you start out with launch control, you probably all know that what you need to do is rig certain body parts. So for this vehicle, that would be the wheels and the body. It doesn't have any brake calipers, so we don't have to worry about that. If I would go ahead and do that right here, then I would select the body mesh. You can see how everything else is connected to that. That's how it's supposed to be. And then I can open the quick tag tool and just hit body. Then I would go through the wheels one by one. You can see how everything is connected to this wheel tire mesh, and that's what's important. It has to be the tire mesh. This is the front left. This is the rear left. This is the front right, and this here is the rear right. And now with that set up, we are ready to just close down this tool and click rig vehicle. And this is basically everything set up for you inside launch control. You can hit shift spacebar or play back the animation. And you can see now a new thing in launch control is that now we've offset all the animation presets to frame 25. The reason for this is you often want to bake physics with something called warm-up frames. Warm-up frames are basically put in place to make sure that the physics don't make a little sort of pop when they start, or that if your car is already running at a high speed, you don't get a intense pitch in the beginning just as the car starts. Because if we start from frame 0, the car would always, according to the physics, be at a completely static state. But if we just leave 25 frames before and then define those as warm-up frames, that means that now when we bake the physics, we won't get these pops, either if the car is static or if the car is running. So the first thing I want to do here is just to go into the setup mode here in the top. So this is to set up the rig. Here you can change useful features of that's specific to your car. So what I like to do is to just take the body and press it all the way down until it starts to say this clipping. This means that now it's detecting that the wheels are at the body is as low as it can get. Usually with other vehicles you would have a body like so. So at some point this distance would be so small that the tire is touching the top. And this is basically what you want to look out for. And when this happens, you want it to say clipping. You want it to clip and stop moving. For this particular model, that's not really the case because it just goes in between, but we still want it to clip at some point. So this here is actually a pretty good value for this vehicle, but let me just increase it a little bit so you can see how you can do that yourself. So it's the bottom out height here. So let's select these two. This is for the front and this is for the back. So let's just select these and then hit G on the keyboard, and then we can pull that up until we have it at a height we would like. So I think I would actually like it to be somewhere around here. Then let's take the body and just pull it all the way up. Now the vehicle is in the air. So I want the wheels to actually hang a little bit lower than they're doing here. So I would take the max travel suspension and just pull that up. Something around there I think is good. And then the last thing I want to do is to take this one, hit Alt G. And then I want to just change the camber offset because there's a little bit of camber here on the wheels by default, which I don't really want. So let's just pull this up like so. And now we're set up and ready to go. So for most car models, this would all happen automatically. But because this model here is a bit peculiar, it has very big wheels, it would sometimes be good to go in and just adjust these things. So you can see here now we have everything working nicely and smoothly, and you have all the interaction from the wheels when the body is moving around. So that's great. So one of the first things I like to do is use the presets to just calibrate my physics to make sure that they work decently. I will just lock the camera to the vehicle so we will be able to track it around and follow it basically. The way I like to do that is just jump into the manual gearbox, down to cinematographer, and then click create hooked cameras. So this here will create a camera that's hooked to the car. Let's just move it a little bit closer like so. Maybe rotate it a little bit around the guy here. And we can hide these camera hooks again. We don't need them right now. Maybe just using this bump here or this slalom here. So you can see the car is doing the slalom and that looks pretty good. So let's try to enable the physics and see what happens or what we get right out of the box. So you can see the first thing that happens is that this G-force meter appears. It is to see what sort of forces are acting on the car with the speed that it will be traveling at and through through the curves. So let's play back here and you'll be able to see how we have pretty high G's when we're turning. And that's because the car is doing pretty tight turns here. So the only time that I saw that it was actually hitting a red area, which is above 1.8, it was this turn here. If we wanted to adjust that, what we can do is decrease the speed at this point. So actually what we can do is go in here to the wheel, and let's just flip this over to the graph editor. Now let's zoom in on these things. Let's just take the entire thing here and scale it along the axis. So this would slow down the car. So if you would play now, you can see how the G's are much lower and we are never even getting above 1 G. So that's one way to decrease the G's. You can also see here there's sort of a little bit of a snap, probably because I wasn't so accurate when I was doing the preset here. So maybe smoothing this out by just increasing the tangent on this curve will also give you a little bit better motion and also have less G's impacting the car. So if you have something like this, which is a super sharp sudden turn, this will give you a massive amount of G's. So let's go back to the beginning and let me just show you what I mean. Did you see that? So this is basically hitting over 2 G's because the car suddenly has to turn so tight. So in general, just avoid having anything that turns super tight, because that will give you way too many G's and it wouldn't look realistic when you're doing the physics. So by smoothing this out, let me just go back here and then let's a little bit further back. Yeah, something like that looks good. So we can also try the drift preset and see how this is. This again seems pretty decent. Let me move all this stuff a little bit over. We don't have any massive G's. We have a little bit of G's here, hitting around 2, so that's a little bit high, but I think it's okay. So to calibrate the physics inside launch control, what I like to do is bring up some of the presets, and let's just start out with this preset here. So that's bumps 1. So right now, I mean, it kind of works, but you can see how the car is sort of jumping across these or skidding across these bumps. That's not really what I'm looking for here. What I'm looking for is something that has a super soft suspension, since we have super long suspension. And also we're looking for something much smoother. So I want the body basically to not move much, but sort of be sailing along in a straight, in a subtle manner. And then the wheels are doing all the work, or the suspension is doing all the work. So what I will start by doing is just change the preset to heavy truck, because I think that's closer to what we want already. You can see we are much closer already. The wheels are barely leaving the ground. They are maybe bouncing a little bit, but the body is still sort of waving like this, going over all the bumps. So let's try to hit customize to sort of expand the settings a little bit. And let's just go over each of these one by one, sort of explaining what they do and what it will change if you change the values. So I will leave this playing back all the time so you can see live what's happening when we change the values. So the first one, spring hardness, is basically how easy it is to compress the springs. That means if I drop this very low, you'll see how our car will actually dip down a lot. That's because we right now simulate gravity. If we turn this off, we have a sort of simpler interface for the physics, which means that now the car will never fly. And you can see how this is more similar to how the physics were working before. But now we have the option of simulating gravity, which generally gives you a more accurate result. But it also can cause stuff like this. When the car is very heavy and the suspension is very soft, that means that the entire body will just sort of sink down and just push towards the floor. So to make up for this, there is the spring offset value. So, and let's take the spring offset and turn this up, maybe something like 0.2. And now you can see how the car is higher, so it's not dipping as much down. So now let's bring our bumps back. And we can see how now the body is moving very, very minimal. It's almost nothing that the body is moving, because all the work is being done by the suspension and the wheels are sort of just taking all of it. The wheels are moving, but the body is not. So on the other hand, if we take the spring hardness and turn it all the way up to, say, 35, first of all, we will have the car jumping now. That's simply because the spring offset is set so high now that it's actually pushing the car up all the time. So what we'll need to do is just reset this one to 0. and you can see now the car doesn't jump anymore, but we get this result. So it looks much, the body has much more motion, and everything feels a little stiffer. If we take this even higher, should be able to see that it's almost like the suspension is not compressing at all, but the car is sort of skidding or jumping across all these things. So that's the spring hardness. So let's again put it back to 10 and set our spring offset to sort of see the two extremes next to each other. You can see how this is very smooth motion on the body. And this here instead is very, almost all the impact from the ground goes directly into the body and makes everything wiggle back and forth. So for this car, I think we will want something like 15 or maybe 17. So let's try setting that up. And probably would need a spring offset around 12, maybe a little bit higher. Let's try something like this. Okay, that's super. So the next setting we have is called damping. This one is quite interesting. If we turn damping off completely, we should technically have the car bounce and wiggle forever. It would never stop wiggling. Yeah, you can see it just sort of keeps going. So if we set this to something like 10, we would again see that it does come to a stop at some point, but after a long time. And if we set this to something like 50, we'll be able to see that the impacts are cancelled out or reduced to zero almost instantly. In other words, these two sliders correlate to the springiness of the spring, so how tight the spring is, how hard the spring is, and the damping, it relates to the dampers inside a car. So how thick is the oil that is sort of damping or slowing down the motion. This sort of smooths out everything and makes the suspension come to a halt. Usually for sedans, you say that when you press the front of the car down and you let go, it will go up like this and then it will come down and stop. It shouldn't be wiggling 5 or 6 times. That means that the suspension is bad. So that's just a good rule of thumb that when you set something up for realistic cars or a sedan or something like that, you want to go for that. You will never want it to be wiggling a long time after it's done. It should sort of, this is already too much, it should sort of come to a halt very fast. And I think the default is also set to 35 and spring hardness there. Anyway, so for this particular animation, I think I will go for something that's quite low on damping, just because I sort of like this motion that keeps wiggling back and forth. It makes it feel more like a toy car, something that's more cartoony and fun rather than super realistic. But still, we should probably go something like 30, and the spring hardness I think is okay here. I like the way that this is working, but I want the physics to be a little more intense. So what I will do is just go into the post effects, and then I'll increase the pitch and maybe the roll a little bit. This means that when the car is braking in the end, it just has a little more of that motion. It doesn't extend the motion or make it go on for longer. That's the damping. But this is just the influence sliders of all this good stuff. Let's maybe put it like so. Awesome. So the next slider we have is called smoothing. And this one is a little bit of a fun one because technically smoothing is just the hardness and damping combined. That means when you want the motion to be more smooth, like in this case, have everything just be softer and sort of like what you imagine as a smooth suspension, you would actually lower the spring hardness and increase the damping at the same time. And that's exactly what this slider is doing. So let's say we had something that's different from this. We had something like harder springs and less damping. So our motion would look, now we have a little bit of jumping, so let's just turn down the spring offset. We had something like this. What the smoothing would do if we turn that up is it will just smooth all that out and try to make everything a little more calm. We can turn it up further. But it's essentially doing the exact same as us decreasing the hardness and increasing the damping. That's the exact same thing it's doing. And now let's continue to the other settings. So most of the time you would leave simulate gravity on, except if you're doing stuff like loops or twists or something to do with Hot Wheels cars, you would probably turn it off simply because if it's unrealistic motion, the gravity might be working against you instead of helping you. So in those cases, just turn it off, but just having the car stick to the path, no matter wherever the path is going. vehicle mass is just the last thing I want to show here. And it works very similar to the spring hardness. So if I decrease the vehicle mass now, you will see how the car becomes more bouncy, more jumpy. And you can see instead if I increase this, we have it sinking down even more. When it sinks down too much, you can see on these wheels that it starts clipping. See the little clipping message here? That's not so good, so let's just increase it to 4 instead. Probably increase the spring offset. So on real cars, what you would actually do is that you're not able to change the mass of the vehicle, right? You can't say, oh wait, my truck is too heavy, let me just make it lighter. So what you will do in that case is, for a heavy truck, you would increase the spring hardness. That's literally what you would do in real life. So in real life, you are not able to move both of these sliders. But because this is CG, we can do whatever we want. So what I would suggest doing is to fit this here to approximately the value that you think will work for your car. Again, we're working with a radio control car, RC car, so this value doesn't really apply to us. But if you were working with a truck, I would probably put this at 2.5 or even 3. Whereas if I'm working with a sedan or a normal vehicle, I would just put it to 1. And then the values will make much more sense out of then the other values will make more sense after that. And this one you don't have to change as much. It's better to just keep this one at a value that you think makes sense and then use the spring hardness to sort of dial in the feeling of the vehicle. And this is indeed an interesting feeling. So again, remember the spring offset, just want to say it again. If it's too high, the vehicle starts bouncing and jumping. And if it's too low, the vehicle will start basically sagging and sort of feeling too heavy. So to explain the last slider, I just set up this jump preset a little bit modified to be able to show how to use the auto level feature. So whenever you have a jump that is not completely straight and the car is going with an angle, you might get weird stuff like this happening. And sometimes it actually just looks nice and it looks pretty realistic, but it can also be too much sometimes where it just looks strange and one wheel is sort of doing its own thing and just flying into the air. So on many cars, you have what is called an anti-roll bar, and that should take care of exactly these things. So it makes sure that when the left wheel goes up, the right wheel of the same pair, so that will be the right rear wheel, would also go up. So they are sort of attached with a twisting force. So that means that it would always try to level these two, and the same for the front wheels. So what we have in launch control right now is an auto level feature. And that's very useful for just taking care of stuff like this. And the way you use it is simply just you pull up the slider like this. So usually adding 50% of auto level will just make sure this stuff doesn't happen. And it would land nicely and flat, less chaotic. And you can see how even though it does fly a little bit, lift the front up a little bit more, but generally it's much more controlled and much more much more even jump. If you ever have the issue that the car suddenly just tilts backwards and the G-force calculator just disappears, jumps into the center of the scene, then this is sadly due to a bug that's in Blender 4.0 right now. It's not in 3.6, so if you're running launch control there, you shouldn't notice this or you shouldn't have this happening to you. It is reported, and I believe the Blender devs are working on it, but right now the only solution for this is simply to close Blender and reopen the same file. And that will reload everything and then it works again. And there we go. After restarting, we have a massive force because it's calculating like it was in here before. But when we play back, we can see that everything is back to normal and everything works as expected again. So in the next part, we will be taking this setup that we've made and these physics that we have dialed in. We'll take what we learned and then put that into an animation, draw a little path that our car can follow, and make a little nice scene that we could place some cameras in and render some videos from.